Good evening. This is the February 27th, 2013 meeting of the Finance Committee. 7:01, starting a minute or so late. Our agenda tonight, call to order. We've got a transfer and an authorization that we need to address. We'll have an update from the DPW director regarding snow and ice expenditures. Our CFO will have a presentation on the fiscal 14 budget. We'll probably have some related discussions to that, and then we'll adjourn. So our first item then would be to vote on a transfer request. Only one tonight. This is from the Department of Inspectional Services. This is a transfer from the Assistant Inspector salary account. There's actually two transfers here. The first one from the Assistant Inspector salary account, present balance of $18,000, amount requested $10,000 to the Planning and Miscellaneous Supplies account. Reason for the transfer is equipment necessary for department operations. Who's this falling on to? Adam? Nice to see you tonight.
Nice to see you. How are you guys doing?
Can I assume that whatever we're talking about here will also cover the second transfer?
Sure. I can answer. I mean, the reasoning behind them covers both items.
Okay.
As you're aware, in the fiscal year 13 budget, there was a line item for a local inspector to work under the building commissioner. Going back about this time last year, we identified that need. It's still currently a need, but at the time we were in the process of hiring our building commissioner, and that process took a little bit longer than we had hoped. He came on as of July 1. The intent was to allow him to be involved in the hiring of that person, so we have interviews starting Tuesday for that inspector. So there's a portion of money that's unused that's already committed. In the process of also hiring the full-time health inspector, those two individuals have identified some equipment and supplies that are necessary to their ability to carry out their duties. So this is money that we have taken out of our request for FY14, and we're using already committed funds to make one-time purchase of equipment. So that's the purpose of the transfer, and that's why there is such a large volume. The training portion is something that we've been looking to try and do for a little bit now, is to provide some computer training for individuals within our office. I've been working with the town manager, and I believe that the offer is going to be made town hall or actually I think town-wide for individuals. I believe that the assistant, I'm not sure what her title is, assistant MIS, or the MIS technician, is going to provide some training, and I believe it's outside of her normal duties, and this is something that we're committing some funds to, because it's important that my staff have the adequate computer resources to be able to handle the volume of our additional paperwork from the new staff.
Okay. Once again, this is going to be an explanation for both transfers, but we need to take them separately. So I'll open up to questions at this point. Kim?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, what kind of equipment are you purchasing for 10 grand?
Well, it's not $10,000 of equipment. It's a variety of smaller purchases. There is some light meters, some sound, some decimeters. There's some other building review equipment, series of flashlights,
Just
miscellaneous hard goods that have a longer life than a one-time expenditure.
Mike?
So, Adam, you said that initially this was in 14's budget?
Well, it never made it to 14's budget because we identified the ability to expend already committed funds, and in the budgeting process internally we felt that we could not make that request based on having these funds.
Okay, so it wasn't in the 14 budget then?
No,
so
and I say that, I talk about what we, our internal planning process.
Okay.
My only question regarding the miscellaneous supplies, what had we been doing that was taking care of these lack of supplies in the past? Decimeters and all this high-tech Ghostbusters stuff.
I think, well, I think that there's a couple of things. We have an inspector who is from an engineering background and likes to have data and have some ability to enforce his decisions with truth and empirical proof. I think that the previous inspector was from an older school of thought, and so those were things that he didn't necessarily delve into. Oh, it looks a little bright, you know, do this. And I think that Mr. Antenna-Vicker really would prefer to be able to point to physical proof that, you know, this is what the decimeter says, you know, this is outside of that range. So I think it's a change in staff, it's a change in perspective, and I think really what it is we're trying to move to a more data-based enforcement.
Okay. And just to kind of fill this out, not really a question, can you just for our television audience just tell us what Inspectional Services, what kind of job this is entailing anyways that we're coming up with this new equipment?
Our department encompasses the Board of Health, which manages public health, which is sort of a nebulous topic, but what people are going to recognize in public health is restaurants, food service, food retail. They do biannual inspections, semi-annual inspections of all food establishments. So there's, you know, test strips for sushi, and they make sure that restaurants are holding to food safety standards. They also inspect septic systems for Title V, both repairs. If you go to sell your house and someone does a Title V inspection, that report submitted to our employees at the Board of Health, they review it, and the Board of Health actually reviews it. It encompasses the building department, which enforces zoning issues and all building permits and construction, making sure that people are doing things to the code, that life safety is adhered to, and they work closely with the fire department in that aspect, as well as enforcing site plans and those things. We have the Conservation Commission under our auspices. They enforce the Wetlands Protection Act and the Auburn Wetlands Bylaw, as well as planning, which is also sort of a nebulous topic. I oversee green initiatives, the Green Communities Grant, economic development falls into there, site plan review, subdivision. So all of those things are wrapped up in there. Animal control is also in there. So we have a fairly vast task.
I just wanted to underline that, hey, look, we're investing $10,000, and this is going to cover a broad part of basically what we're doing up here at the Town Hall for the town. And thank you for that well-needed, long-winded explanation on all that you guys cover.
Well, I want you all to get your money's worth. And
you guys do a lot of hard work. I do understand that.
Ed, through the chair, Adam, if we approve the 12,000, it looks like you have 18,000 left in that account. So if you hire an assistant, are you going to be all set?
yes, that will cover them for the remainder of the year. That 12,000 is, I think, the salary expenditure through the middle of February. So there will be a small cushion in there.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Okay, do we have a motion on this?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So voted. So that transferred 10,000. Our second transfer related also from the Assistant Inspector salary account. Present balance now $8,000. Amount requested $2,000. And this would be for the planning and conference discussion that Adam had on this for training for department staff. Are there any further questions relative to that? Do you have a motion?
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So voted.
Thank you very
Adam,
much.
thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Good there. At this time, can I ask, Bill, can you come on up, give us an update on snow and ice at whatever length you want. I believe we'll have to do some sort of, I don't know, would we call it a motion anyways, for deficit spending? So, okay. We'll do that after you kind of fill us in on where we are right
Okay.
now.
Good evening, Bill Coyle, DPW Director. What you should have before you this evening is a request for the DPW to deficit spend our snow and ice balance. We have budgeted for the year $243,850. We are currently in a deficit of $39,089.94. And just to give you an update, as you can see, you have each individual account outlined before you. Some of them are in a deficit, some are not. In particular, probably the two largest numbers are the sand and gravel account, basically sand, which is roadway sand. We still have $26,000 remaining, and then the salt account is $48,000 in a deficit. So the overtime accounts, part-time wages essentially what we pay our cemetery, parks, and sewer employees when they're plowing during overtime situations. Obviously, during normal work hours, they would just be paid through the normal wage account. And then the overtime account is for the highway department employees as well. One of the things I wanted to point out too is the equipment rental account. If you'll look, we budgeted $35,000. We're at about $900 in the red, negative on that account. That's something that's quite a significant change, I think, from the past. We're trying to do more work in-house with our own staff. Typically, that 3-year average, I believe, has been, somewhere in the $50,000, actually $55,000 range.
It's still February, don't jinx it. Okay.
So that's
It's still
well,
February.
knock on wood, that's,
Thank you.
we're down on that. So, you know, we're hopeful that the remaining 3-4 weeks, like they have been in the past, this blizzard alone, we expended about $60,000 just to fight that blizzard. The difficult thing that we've had to deal with is the past 3 weekends, all these storms have occurred during overtime situations. We were actually fortunate last night that a lot of the work that we had to do was during normal work hours today, cleaning up in the morning. So unfortunately, a lot of the work has been during overtime situations. One of the things I wanted to point out to you as well is that FEMA is currently looking at potentially approving snow assistance declaration. I think MEMA is in a situation where they have to show that we meet certain thresholds to be eligible. Jeff Mitchell has been working very hard putting that information together, working also with police and fire. We're currently looking at about $114,000 that would be eligible. Even though we spent direct costs about $60,000 for our labor and materials in DPW, we also can include police, fire, and also the equipment that's being used. So of that $114,000, if MEMA and FEMA approve it, we would get 75% of that, which is about $85,000 back. So that's, be happy to answer any questions. I know I gave you a lot of information there.
I'll just add to that, what do you figure, about 3 years before we get that money back? Is that
I'll
pretty much
defer to
the
Ed
normal
for that
amount?
one.
Yeah, so
Hopefully within,
it's not coming back by June 30th.
won't be
that's
before
for
July
sure.
1st, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
that's for sure. Okay. Are there any questions on this? I believe last year, just from a historical perspective, we were right on budget.
Yes.
A couple of $1,000s.
Last year, we ended up at $241,000. We budget $243,000. Previously, the 3-year average had been $317,000. Last year was obviously somewhat of an unusual winter.
Right.
So if you look at the 3-year average, we're right now currently about $30,000 below that 3-year average.
Yep.
And again, depending on what happens in the next 4 weeks or so,
Right.
we'll see where we finish up.
Right. And I think also we have been increasing the budget to the storm and ice as we've been able to over the last 3 or 4 years. I don't know numbers exactly, but I know we've been trying to build that up and try to take care of that as current year spending.
We have increased it from a level of 180 to 243. I can tell you that an additional request was made this year. Unfortunately, it didn't make the first cut, but it is on the list of priorities that have been prepared. is the last page in the packet tonight. So that's something we will revisit if additional funds do become available.
And I would think further to that, I know the salt calcium, we're using that new product, the blue stuff. I know I'm going technical on you here, Bill. But there's also quite a bit available in the sand and gravel, so we're going to be fine-tuning
Correct.
both our budgeting and our purchasing. You know, this is what, first year or second year?
This is the second year, but again, last year really wasn't a true test
Right.
of what we would use for a normal year. I think this year is. And what I did last year, and then again this year, I'm slowly transitioning most of those funds, the sand and the salt, more towards the salt balance or account. So, because there's also a significant savings, the more of the salt, which is treated with the magnesium chloride that we use, and less sand, there's a savings in the sweeping and then disposal of that material down the road. 'Cause to dispose of it was about $20 a yard when we had to clean up the material we've had in the past.
Okay, great. I appreciate the update. Any other questions on this? Great, and I guess at this point, I'll accept a motion. We need to authorize deficit spending, which I believe is, we're allowed under state law to really borrow against next year's budget or next year's funds to fund anything we may need to cover the deficit that we have now. Would that be after we close out our accounts?
Through the chair, what I would suggest is that in accordance with Chapter 44, Section 31D, you are authorizing the town to exceed or spend in excess of appropriation. In essence, deficit spend. If you look at the presentation made by Mr. Coyle tonight, in the aggregate, all the accounts cumulative are in the red. Takes one vote, you're not doing it by account, we're doing it in the aggregate. We will deficit spend if we have the ability to make transfers before June 30th to cover that deficit, we will do so like we have done in prior years. If we don't have the capacity to do that, then we would be allowed to raise that deficit on next year's tax recap sheet.
Eddie, has it always had to come to the Finance Committee for approval? Because I don't remember that as something.
No, under the new charter, under this form of government, town manager form of government, it has to be approved by the town manager as well as the Finance Committee. Under the old charter, it was solely the Board of Selectmen. So this is the first year. Last year, we didn't have a deficit to bring forward.
Okay.
So this is the first year.
So I guess the only unclear thought I have on this is the town manager and the finance committee approves this. Who approves it first? Is it us?
I think
Or
the
the
town
town
manager has approved it.
I think
You
the
have
town manager
already.
makes a recommendation to the finance committee like we would do for the budget.
Okay.
So we're recommending,
Just so we're
as town
following
manager,
policy.
recommending that we would deficit spend in the snow and ice account. And then you would approve that and authorize us to do so.
As a motion, okay. Any further questions on procedure on this anyways? Do we have a motion?
Sure, so move,
Thank you.
whatever the
Do we have
motion
a
was.
second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So voted. And I understand you won't have to come before us again
Correct.
to approve for
That
the
would
rest of the
cover it
fiscal
for the
year.
remainder.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bill, thank you. Appreciate the update. Bill, hopefully we don't have any other big storms, but we may ask you to come forward once again just to give us an update. I hope to see you for better reasons. Okay, thank you. All right. Next, we have the fiscal 14 budget. I know, Ed, you presented the other night to the Board of Selectmen. I assume you'll be presenting somewhat similar to us, so the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I get started, I just want to take an opportunity to thank all the department heads who really put a lot of time and effort into this process since we actually kicked the budget off in late November. I know Bill will be happy, and I'm going to use Bill as an example. I think between capital, the operational side of the budget, we must have at least met a half a dozen times. So it was a lot of give and take, a lot of back and forth, and the departments set some time aside and at times met on short notice to get this packet to you on time. I'd also like to thank Sharon Kwiatkowski, who it wouldn't be possible without her doing her things behind the scenes. She puts a lot of time and effort into this, and actually starts right after the budget is passed. The year is closed, she starts working on the documents, and Sharon, I truly appreciate all your hard work. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will start the presentation.
Thank you.
I just want to let you know, this was presented to the Board of Selectmen on Monday evening. The Board of Selectmen passed it, took a vote to pass this to the Finance Committee, so you could start your deliberations on the budget by a vote of 4-0. Okay. This budget presented to you, Town Manager's recommendation, is a budget that incorporates, as part of its appropriation, a level of tax levy equal to about 1.66% of the total 2.5%. 1.25% of the levy is used for the operational side of the budget, and in accordance with the financial policy, 0.1% or 0.25 is earmarked for capital. I can tell you that the financial policies adopted by both the Board and the Finance Committee has been incorporated into this budget. And it is identified throughout the presentation. It may have a highlight of policy or a description to the right, and I'll try to touch upon that as we go through the presentation. This budget tonight requires total appropriations of $54,229,349.74. Total revenue, and I will go through the components of the revenue. Total revenue sources of $54,236,471.94, leaving at this point an unobligated balance of $7,122.20. As you can see, the revenue is broken out by local receipts, which is in this budget increasing by $481,000 or 6.59%. Total cherry sheet revenue is estimated at this point a reduction of 2% or $195,000. Tax levy at 3.02, even though it's 1.66. The new growth comes into play here, which is not part of 2.5, at $978,000. Debt exclusion, basically level funded, small increase of $10,800, a little less than 1%. And a reduction of available funds of $345,000, almost $346,000, a decrease of 14.64%. And I will get into the schedules for each one of these revenue sources that will identify those pluses and minuses. Total revenue would be up 1.74% or $929,000. Almost an equal amount of appropriation, $921,000 or 1.73. All right, now we're going to break out the revenue by component. Tax levy utilizes 1.50%. 1.25 of that is for the operating budget. 0.25 is used in accordance with the financial policy for earmarking capital. The total amount of 1.50% is $523,189.70. This budget also includes year one assessment for the new Bay Path School. Bay Path went out and borrowed an initial $9 million of roughly $30 million they need, net debt, for their share of the construction project. That would have to be assumed through the tax levy. That was passed by the voters as a ballot question. So the total tax levy of 1.5% plus Bay Path, $587,196.70, or 1.68% out of a possible 2.5%. This budget also uses, in accordance with the financial policy, a conservative estimated new growth of $400,000. 5-year average has been about $629,000. We indicated through the policy anything in excess of 400 would continue to be used in the movement of a single tax rate. So it would offer some tax relief in order to get to that single tax rate. in this budget, the excess levy would increase, because we're not taxing to the full 2.5, by $293,000. As a percentage of excess levy, that would give us about 7.65%. So we'd be taxing at roughly 92.30%. 92.35%. So the total levy required to fund this budget, as you can see highlighted in green, $33,384,741. Now, under Prop 2.5, we're able to raise 2.5% of current year tax base, FY13 tax base. That equates to $871,982.83. We are only utilizing, I know the prior screen said 1.68. This is 1.66 because remember, we still have $7,000 unobligated. So we would be using roughly 66.35% of 2.5%. 427,000 of that is going towards departmental budgets. 87,198, 1/10 of 2.5%, is going for the earmark capital. $64,007 is going to that Bay Path assessment, leaving the remaining balance of $293,444.05 to increase our excess levy. Cherry Sheet State Aid. Despite the governor's recommendation, his House 1 budget actually would give us $883,000 of additional Chapter 70 funds for educational purposes. It would also give us an additional $71,000 of unrestricted local aid. Total combined, about $995,000. That recommendation, or his budget, is predicated on a 1% hike in the state income tax. House numbers are not out. State revenues are currently lagging behind. Through the first 4 months of the fiscal year, on an annualized basis, the Commonwealth's projected state revenue shortfall was approaching $1 billion. When we put the budget together, that was the outlook that we were faced with. We do not have the House numbers as of yet. I just read something on MMA that now targets that release around April 10th, hoping to get it sooner. That being said, I think given the current shortfall in state revenues and no indication on where the House or the Senate stands on the governor's proposal, I think it would be in the town's best interest to remain where we are. Now, we dropped it by 2% because if the state had $1 billion hole, they would have to make that up somehow. And without any tax increases, more likely than not, it's going to impact municipalities' local aid. So we estimated that as a 2% reduction, or close to $196,000 less than current fiscal year. Here's a history of the Cherry Sheet State Aid, as you can see in 2011 to 2014. If you look at 2013 to 2014, that's where you see the 2% reduction, or roughly $196,000 less. Available funds. These first two bullets are a direct result of the adoption of the financial policies. We had in our FY13 budget as a funding source $200,000 for overlay surplus, $200,000 for free cash. We plan on eliminating that over a 3-year period, so we dropped that by roughly 1/3. So we dropped overlay by $70,000 and a decrease in free cash by $70,000. In 13, there was also utilization of one-time appropriation for capital needs of $173,000. That money will no longer be available in 2014. We are also covering our total sewer enterprise capital costs through available funds within the sewer enterprise fund and appropriation through retained earnings. And here's a list of all the available funds, total revenue source of $2,017,241.75. This is all in your packet, so if you want to address any particular line item, we can get into that after the presentation. Local receipts, we're estimating $7,789,892.12. In accordance, once again, with the financial policies, we are not projecting any estimates to be in excess of what we will actually receive for 2013. The local receipts also proposes an increase in the trash fee. We are currently subsidizing the cost of the trash program by $198,000. We provided an analysis to you. I can tell you that all costs associated with trash were included in that analysis. I can tell you over the last several years we've been operating at a loss. We haven't increased trash since 2004. In order to make up that $198,000, that would require a blended increase of about 20%. Our current rates are, compared to other communities in the area, is low. We are the lowest around. So it's tough to advocate for a fee increase, but I can tell you that in the establishment of any fee, whether it be trash or any building permit fee, it's designed specifically to cover the entire cost of the activity. We have, I've discussed this with the Public Health Director, who administers the program. We will be taking this to the Solid Waste Committee. We're asking them to review it. They've reviewed it once before, about a year ago. We did an analysis back in FY12 for the Board of Selectmen. They actually showed an operating deficit of $148,000. So that has grown because the cost of trash disposal has actually increased over the years contractually by a maximum of 3% with a long-term 20-year contract we have with Wheel Liberator. Even though our tonnage has gone down at the Wheel because we are increasing our recyclables, the cost of disposal of that trash has increased over those years as well. Another revenue source, this is the debt exclusion that we have to pay through 2024 for the debt and interest resulting from the construction of the high school. FY14 debt is $940,000. We have total interest on that debt of $641,000. We have two offsets to that. One is a premium as a result of money we received when we went out and sold those bonds. We had to reserve that, and we have to pay that over the life of the bonds as well. 14 offset amount is $9,334. And we had roughly $1.1 million of bonds remaining after the construction of the high school, after we received our entire reimbursement from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Those bonds, the proceeds were required to be set aside and paid as an offset to our debt and interest as well. So we amortized that over the life of the bonds. That value was roughly $127,000. Net debt that we have to raise outside of the levy limit, $1,444,155.83.
Hey, Ed, just a real quick question on that. It's almost a side thing. That's why I want to bring it up now. Do we have an ability to go back out to the market on those bonds? Are we locked in for the next 10 years? I know something had come up in a side conversation, and I thought this would be a good time just to maybe talk to that very briefly.
That's great. Timing couldn't be better. Good question. Yes, these bonds are callable actually next spring.
Okay.
So if the rates continue to remain low, we have every intention of recalling these, refunding these for a lower rate, and saving the taxpayers of this community a substantial amount of money. It was a $19 million, close to a $20 million issue. Halfway through it, $10 million remaining. We just refunded $945,000. And over the remaining years of that, we saved the taxpayers $140,000. So 140 on roughly $1 million.
900 on 900,000, you saved 140.
Yes.
Would that correlate on the 10 million that's remaining?
Yes. So if you do the math, we could save the taxpayers close to $1 million if the rates.
And we're talking rate environment in what, 2004 to 2006 versus now?
I think we paid close to 5%, 4-point-some odd percent, and I think our rate was 1.9 something. So substantial savings.
Sorry to interrupt you, Ed. I just.
Oh, I'm
thought
glad you asked that
there'd be a
question.
point on that. Okay.
Total revenue, $54,236,471.94, 1.74% increase. On the appropriation side, this budget has been prepared with a 2% wage consideration for all employees, general government as well as schools. I can tell you on the general government side that the salary and wage reserve has been indexed by that 2%. So you're going to see roughly an increase of about $160,000 in that line item. A 2% consideration was given to the schools when, in preparation of their budget. We had discussions with the superintendent and school business manager on that before they started preparing their budget. On the wage side, this budget only includes one new position. It is a part-time position in the Planning and Economic Development under Department of Inspectional Services. It is a half-time position, 0.50 full-time equivalent. We approve the position at a level of funding that would allow the department to hire effective January. We didn't fund it for the entire fiscal year. We actually see this as a benefit to the department. We believe that this position will generate some revenue in the commercial industrial sector and would more than pay for itself. This budget also provides for any contractual and grade and step increases that are currently in place. On the school recommendation, it increases their budget by $603,000 at 2.78%. Their request asks for an increase of 3.14%. It's roughly $76,000 short of what they asked for. It provides for their annual outside article for Medicaid receipts. FY13 level was 112. That same level of funding is expected to be received in FY14. If, in fact, the federal government question does cut that level of funding, we would request at time a reduction in that article request.
Ed, can I interrupt you just briefly regarding the schools? I know they've been working real hard on their budgets, that kind of thing. But I had actually heard or read somewhere that there was some either discussion regarding an override for their budget or something along those lines. From what I've seen from the school committee hearings or on TV that I've seen, I haven't seen or heard anything on that. And obviously, that's a big number and part of a bigger strategy. Has that come forth to the town on this?
I can tell you there has been no discussion on a 2.5 override to fund either the school or general government side of the budget. And there may be some confusion as to what's being put out there. I know there's some discussion about a debt exclusion for the middle school, but certainly no talk, no discussion about an override to fund the operational side of the budget.
Okay, and one further question too that, and this goes back to process. I know certain ways we finance the town go to town meeting, some go to a vote, which is coincidentally later in the month of May. In terms of an override, a budget override, the process, my understanding is that goes before the Board of Selectmen for a vote from them, and then it goes to a town vote It's not a town meeting issue? Just so we're clear on this.
Town meeting cannot send a override question to the voters. That's by vote of the Board of Selectmen. That vote would go, if it's voted by the Board of Selectmen to go to the voters, it goes to a ballot question. Once passed, then it has to go back to town meeting for appropriation.
And any ballot question still has to go through the Board of Selectmen, though? True? The Board of Selectmen won't have to agree to put that on the ballot?
Yes.
Okay. Just so we're clear on that. There is a process there. So this discussion, and it may come up, and discussion's healthy on this, let's just be darn clear that it's going to take quite a bit of a process, and I don't believe, at least from what I've seen, the school committee is pondering that and moving forward with it, and that's going to take some time and some public hearings to get to the ballot if that were the case, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
No talk
Thank
of
you.
it, no talk of an override.
Sorry to go sideways on it, but I just want to make clear.
The school department, one other article that they will be presenting is interest earned on a $500,000 trust that we set aside for the gymnasium at the high school. The yield on that annually is known in April. That value of $8,867 is the actual value for 13. So we know that's going to change. We won't know that until April, but for presentation purposes, we basically level funded that. Recommendations for debt. This is one area that has always been of some concern to us, and we actually addressed through the financial policies, and actually had some in-depth discussions with the rating agency on our debt burden. In this budget, our debt increases by $563,000. That $563,000 accounts for roughly 30.38% of all the appropriations being recommended in the budget. So roughly 1/3 of the appropriations we're asking or recommending is in the area of debt. So we're trying to get this under control, and we're doing that, and that's why we actually proposed that financial policy. It's going to take some time to get there, but it is a plan, and we may be looking for opportunities outside of what we have proposed in the financial policies to address our debt burden. So if some additional revenue does become available, and we know it is reoccurring revenue, we may suggest that we apply more to our capital side rather than apply it to the operational side of the budget. In the area of employee benefits, we're doing pretty well on our group health insurance. Actually sat down with our advisors. Our loss ratio, it looks very well. We have, I think, 2 claims in excess of $90,000 where our reinsurance kicks in. Last year we had about 8 claims at this time. So things are looking pretty good. We're hopeful that we'll be able to at least level fund in terms of premium our health insurance. So this $50,000 would account for any new employees or any new enrollments.
Changes in mix, yep.
We know what our Worcester Regional Retirement System assessment is. That's up $102,000. Our unemployment comp is running low this year. We're hoping it will remain that way. We appropriated $75,000 in 13, where I think year-to-date we've expended about 15. We're over halfway there, so we reduced that by $25,000. Under the Health Care Reform Act, there's a new provision or a mandate that requires us to do a health care audit every 2 years. So the cost of a health care audit, which we're required to do in FY14, we got a proposal on that. It's going to cost us about $14,000.
What is that, Ed? I understand it's part of the Obama deal, but, so what is it you have to go through? They do an audit of our...
They actually check eligibility of those enrolled in the plan. They actually check on those dependents who are using claims within the plan. and they determine whether they're truly eligible or not. So if someone is not eligible and they're on the claimant list, there's medical claims, this would flush that out.
Is this incremental cost to the town?
Incremental?
Additional cost as a result of?
Yes, it is an additional cost. I can tell you, we did one on our own before this mandate was required, and we recognized a savings of $140,000, $150,000.
So actually, we could
So
benefit.
by doing it, there's a savings
Okay.
that we normally would incur.
So it isn't really incremental. You would hope you'd find benefit.
Yes, yes. And we're continuing to fund our OPEB obligation, not to the extent that we should be, but we started a commitment in FY13 by funding $500,000 towards that. We just received a draft of our new actuarial study. I can tell you our liability went down by $10 million. It went down for a number of reasons. One, they do an actuarial study all over again, but two, under healthcare reform, there's a new provision now that migrates anyone Medicare eligible 65 years or older over to the federal government. And as a result of that, that liability is lessened on the town side and is absorbed by federal government. As you can see here, by department, it's going to give you the level of increase or decrease, and it's going to give you the total percentage of change. I can tell you on the town department side, the level of increase at $348,000 equates to an increase of 2.78%. On the school side, the level of increase $603,000, also at 2.78%. So there's parity between school and town on budgetary recommendation in terms of increase. Bottom line, if you factor in all the other fixed costs, debt, interest, capital, bottom line increase 1.73%. Total increase $922,049. This pie chart indicates by function level of appropriation. As you can see, education is number one at 42.95, followed by employee benefits at 15.65, public safety at 11.33, debt and interest at 7.93, public works at 7.80, general government at 5.62, and assessments, offsets, overlays, CIP articles at 4.62, solid waste at 1.73, and human services at 1.60, followed by inspectional economic services at 0.76.
Ed, can you just clarify, I think I know the answer, employee benefits, that's for all town employees, school and town hall, et cetera? That's
Yes,
just how we
town-wide.
apportion that out? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
That was my question.
There you go.
Indirect costs are included in that education percentage there.
Indirect costs are not included in
Okay.
that.
Thanks, Ed.
Actually, if we were to carve out the indirect cost, the debt, any costs associated with the school departments, in addition to their direct appropriation, you'd be upwards of 62, 63%. So, part of general government, part of employee benefits are carrying that school department cost. It's in there. Total appropriations, recommendation, $54,229,349.74, 1.73% increase. You take our total revenue, total appropriations, there's an unobligated balance of $7,122.20. And here's a list of the priorities that were not met in the recommendation. We're hopeful that at some point we will be able to revisit this as numbers become available from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, as well as other revenue sources that may shift during that course of time. I can tell you that this has been amended to reflect a need that I omitted by mistake. There is a library component in there that identifies a piece of technology as well as some library materials. So there should have been an additional handout given to you tonight that would reflect that change. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions at this point.
Great, Ed, thank you for a very concise presentation. Definitely appreciate it. I know there's a couple of small questions I've been through here. Has anyone kind of picked off anything that they wanted to bring up at this point? Any? Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
Question on the police item on the priority list. Are those positions that are not filled right now? Or are they filled?
No, these would be new positions. I think
Okay.
at the height of their personnel, as a result of the override, they received 6 new positions, 5 patrol, 1 sergeant. And when we went through some difficult times, 3 positions had been removed. And since then, the chief has advocated to reinstate those positions or reintroduce those positions. So I can tell you that is probably the top on our priority list. So if money should become available, that's one area we want to focus on first.
Going to that, Ed, they got an override, right, a regular 2.5 override to fund those positions, which is still being raised every year, even though they don't have a position. So the money's going to the money that was raised for that purpose is going to something else.
And that's a good point. But we also lost money from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that funds our Quinn, or their Quinn obligation. So we lost roughly about $170,000 there. So it was tough to maintain that level of support, given the fact that the Commonwealth had actually pulled the plug on that funding source.
I have one other question on something totally different. Under your Proposition 2.5 page, where you have it broken down, the Bay Path 64,000, that's for the new school. Why is that not separate from what we're raising? Why isn't that treated like other debt exclusions?
Well, and
Do you know?
yes.
Do you understand my question?
Yes, because it wasn't a debt exclusion. The first vote was a debt exclusion. Because I thought the same thing when I first got the assessment. I said, this is going to be raised outside of levy as a debt exclusion. Come to find out, the vote, all the votes, all the community votes were not a debt exclusion. It was a combined vote. So a lot of communities, I know Paxton recently went for a debt exclusion vote to cover the cost of their assessment. Now, we can do the same thing. The thing is if we bring it to the voters and it fails, we're still obligated to pay it.
But isn't that what the voters thought they were voting on? Because the voters already voted. I mean,
Yeah.
the Auburn
It wa-
voters approved
It was a
that.
combined vote, a collective vote. The original one was a debt exclusion because each community voted on their own piece. This other one was a combined, collected, cumulative vote, tally vote, which determined whether or not it was going to pass or fail. That was not a debt exclusion vote. Now, we can still bring it to the voters, and that's a discussion we will have to bring to the Board of Selectmen to see. If we bring it to the voters and it fails, we have to pay for it anyway. The fact that the voters approved it indicates that they wanted it. We would have to fund it anyway.
were they clear, was Bay Path clear about this when they did this vote? Because I thought we were voting a debt exclusion.
And I have
For
to,
that
and I have to
second
be
vote.
honest with you, I thought the second vote was a debt exclusion vote as well.
So that doesn't make me, as a finance committee member, particularly happy with the Bay Path administration. I mean, we supported moving forward with this project. And I kind of feel like we got shafted.
Actually, Ed, I forgot what meeting it was, but actually, isn't that 64,000 just for next year, but then down the road, it's gonna
Yes.
be 200 plus?
As I understand it, they borrowed $9 million this January. They're gonna borrow a $9 million next January, and another $9 million the following January. So their borrowing need is actually driven by a cash flow, probably from the general contractor, or through some value engineering that put a total value on the project. So $64,000 only represents 1/3 of our costs. So if the rates are the same next January, we'll assume another $64,000, and then another $64,000. So that's roughly $190,000. I think when they made the presentation at the high school, based on the rates at that time, with an index of a little higher rate, I don't think, I think they wanted it to be a little conservative. I think they pegged it at $220,000. So we actually saved some money because the rates are a little low.
Right, that's a number I remember, was about 220 when that's all said and done. So at this point, we're raising this 64,000 this year through levy. I guess the advantage is we're not financing it then, so we're not paying interest. Although I'll say that's a pretty weak argument, therefore, we're pushing maybe a little bit more onto our debt CIP because we couldn't finance it through our levy. So, yeah, we'll certainly revisit that because I'm kind of interested if there's a long-term strategy in terms of addressing this, or we just add it to our levy going forward on that and take care of it. I mean, we'll be looking at it every year, I believe, right? Anyways,
We'll be looking at this for the next 30 years.
you will be. I hope.
That's not gonna happen.
But, there you go, there you go. But I think we'll revisit it, yeah, I think this is its own issue, and hey, maybe we gotta go back and say, what did they actually lay in front of us, and maybe we just assumed because we had looked at it as a debt exclusion before, that's the way we were looking at it. I just don't remember what they laid in front of us for the second vote. Any other questions?
I have a question about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So my question is, we get an assessment from Bay Path for this, and our portion of that, the cost for the $9 million borrowing is $64,000. That includes debt and interest, right?
Yes.
So if we borrowed the money, we'd be paying interest again, right? I mean, if we put it outside our levy limit and decided, or
No, if we
borrow.
put it, it just raises the amount we need in order to cover the debt and interest on an annual basis. So
But if we did go out to borrow on it, though,
we wouldn't have to go out and borrow. It just
All right.
raises it through
all right,
taxation.
yeah,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions? I've got a couple anyways. Just to be clear, on the last page of priorities not met, I know you'd mentioned that the police is certainly a very high priority. The rest of these, they're in no particular order in terms of priorities.
Correct.
At this point in time, just to be clear, right? Okay, just want to make sure. And Bay Path, their operating budget, the $850,000, that's kind of early to have an exact number. Is that just based
It's
on
an
House
exact
one?
number. Well, and it's subject to change. Certainly, they've presented their budget, and it's contingent upon assumptions they're making for state funding as well.
Okay. So that could move around even though it was a very specific number coming on that.
Oh, okay, all right. There's a letter in Bay Path section that explains that.
Oh, okay. I haven't got to that yet.
I have a
Go ahead,
question.
Ann.
Question about the library. Does the budget as presented without the unmet recommendations, does it meet the requirements for the
I
state?
think it falls short by small dollars. I think I put a footnote, I may have put a footnote at the bottom of the page.
Gotcha. All right, thank you. Oh,
The net minimum contribution is $570,364.67. Our recommendation is $569,571. So it's about $800 short of minimum.
shouldn't we have just put the 800 in? It seems kind of like a small amount. I mean, I'm surprised.
Well, we have $7,000 left.
Right.
That was a preliminary number,
Yep.
so.
So your dart throwing came in pretty close, I guess, is pat yourself on the back. And once again, in terms of process on this,
Right.
we have to end up with a balanced budget. And every year I've been on this board, we've had some period of time during these month and a half where we've left ourselves out of budget because we were waiting for more information or whatever. So I have no problem doing that again. If we feel strong enough on a certain budget that takes us out of budget, and we'll just bring the total budgets back in by the time we're done with things. We usually seem to have some room to maneuver on that. And I think we're doing the department heads a disservice if we're not digging our feet in a little bit, I'll say against town administration, on moving a budget where we seem to think things should fit in. So please make sure, if you have a strong opinion on that, let's bring it forward and let's see what we can work out on that. Hey, Ed, can you just clarify the salary reserve? That's basically we're at this point taking whatever contracts are up. We're not layering them into individual budgets yet. We are creating a pool of dollars, and this is our normal process, just so as we're going through this.
I think if we, and we've talked about this before, I think if we folded it into the budget, then it's telling the departments it's available for
Right. No, it's
contractual
right.
increase.
It's a pool of dollars.
So it becomes part of a whole. And certainly, we're not, and I want to make this clear, we're not committed to a 2% increase. It's just a value, it's an index that we added based upon a number of things. There's an industry standard that bumps it close to that amount. And a number of other factors that come into play, but.
Okay. I've got one more question, and then if anyone else after that. I know you had mentioned in your presentation on Monday night that there's a sum of funds, I want to say somewhere around $800,000, that the state had earmarked for Auburn in the past, catching up on some prior years' sins that the town got, pardon my French, screwed on. Is that factored into that 2% reduction, or do we still think that whatever happens, that promise to the town of Auburn is still going to be met?
There was an reform to education reform back in 2006. It actually put us on a new funding schedule because we were not getting our fair share. I thought we were on a 5-year schedule. There was 1 year when they froze that because the state didn't have the ability to make whole on, they had a problem. So I wasn't sure whether the current fiscal year that we're in was the last year or whether we had another year. I'm being told that we're still on a funding schedule. So even if things were level funded, we're one of 18 communities that are on this funding schedule. So even if the Commonwealth level funded Cherry Sheet State Aid, we would still be due an increase. We just don't know how much that is.
Okay, so your 2% guesstimate is still blending that in. But there could be some upside
Yes.
relative to this, and this will be what, the last year of that?
I believe so. I'll follow up on that with,
Just not that important. Any other questions on the budget? General questions? Okay, so we have an idea on process here. We'll have the department heads in, if they want to come, depending on how big or small the budget, that kind of thing. Certainly open to them anytime. I will say there's a few department heads here. We are scheduling specific budgets we'll be going over, especially the larger ones, and we like to keep them in some kind of order. So if a department head has a reason to come in one Wednesday night versus another, personal schedules, please let Sharon know, and we'll try to accommodate them. The schools are coming in on at least March 27th for a presentation relative to the middle school project, and we may fit in their budget depending on timing. We may not. So if I can recommend department heads, feel free to come in. We love to hear stories on how your budget's going and that kind of thing. Anything else? I was going to say let's start looking at budgets, but no, I don't think we should tonight. It's too rainy out. So if there isn't anything else, I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye, so voted. Thank you.